am very happy that we have Matt Dunlop with us today. So Matt is a senior geologist at Freeport Exploration, and he currently runs Freeport's Exploration Mineralogy and Geochemistry Lab, and is involved in identifying and testing new technologies and methods for enhancing ore body knowledge. So over the past few years, they have been testing several different core scanners where they've learned a lot about what you need to know before deploying a scanner at your core shed or drill site. So this is going to be an awesome session. I'm so grateful that you're here to share all this with us, Matt. So thank you. But before we do get stuck in, I was really curious about what got you into geology in the first place.
Sure, yeah, thanks for the nice introduction. So I am from New York originally, and I grew up on Long Island, right outside New York City. So terminal moraine, lots of terminal moraines, no rocks in place. They just seemed rocks in outcrop seemed very exotic to me.
Yeah.
And when I went to college in northern New York, I always really liked rocks in high school, and I took a geology class as a general education credit for my physical science credit. And I was like, well, it'd be cool to be a geologist, but I bet you could only work in a museum or something like that. Because, of course, being from Long Island, what did I know about geology? And then my teacher showed pictures of him riding around the Nevada desert on ATVs looking for gold. And I was like, oh, this looks pretty sweet. I'm going to do that. And then sure enough, my first job out of college was looking for gold in Nevada. So
Oh, that's
that,
awesome.
that's how I got into it.
That is awesome. And so have you managed to travel a fair bit with your job? I'm curious what some like career highlights that you've had so far.
Let's see. So, I've worked in Nevada looking for gold. I've worked in Michigan for nickel copper exploration. I've done field work in Alaska on a layered mafic intrusion off the coast of Alaska there. Then eventually Tucson, and then just moving around. I've lived in New York and Indiana, Nevada, Michigan, Wyoming, Toronto. Now I'm based temporarily in Toronto. Um, Other places I've traveled to, not for work, that I thought were a lot of fun, were, recently my wife went to Morocco and Iceland. Both of
Oh,
those are really
wow.
interesting places.
That's
So
cool.
not work related, they're just fun.
Yeah, but very geologically beautiful too.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I was walking around Iceland like, oh my God, everything's so new.
I'd love to go. It looks incredible. Yeah, that's so
Yeah.
special. I ask every speaker to bring some favorite pet rocks, and I believe you've bought a couple for us today. I was hoping
I
you could
do.
do a bit of show and tell.
All right. So I've got a pretty one and a weird one. So I'll
Cool.
start with the pretty one. And this is a piece of wollastonite ore from northern New York. There's a mine on the edge of the Adirondacks, basically, where they mine wollastonite. So there's a giant crystal of wollastonite in there, and then some diopside and grossular garnet. And that was really close. That was from one of my undergrad field trips, one of my mineralogy field trips. So this one kind of sits on my desk. It's a really good one, and most people have not seen a wollastonite crystal that big, and sure haven't picked one up outside. Um, my weird one is this one. It's not super pretty. It's a little sparkly, but this is a piece of flow-banded Wyomingite.
Wyomingite.
Wyomingite is one of those. There's the saying that like alkaline rocks make up like 1% of the igneous rocks on Earth, but more than half the names or something like that. Wyomingite is one of those. It is a diopside, lucite, phlogopite, phonolite rock.
That's
It's
a
a lamproite. It's
mouthful.
an lamproite. Yeah. So
I
this
wouldn't
one
even be able
comes
to
from.
attempt to say that again.
Yeah, yeah. I had to like write it down and be like, I got to get all the things.
Yeah.
Um, it's from a pretty cool volcanic field in Wyoming called the Lucite Hills, north of Green River. And it's a really interesting volcanic field, I think, because there's all these little volcanoes that are all strange alkaline rocks, all different weird ones, and they all erupted like 1 to 2 million years apart, 1 to 3 million years apart, and the last eruption was about 1 or 2 million years ago. So I was like, I'm like, one of these days it's gonna go again, and there's gonna be some fresh Wyomingite on the surface, and I want to go check it out.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
Oh, that was awesome. Thank you so much for sharing them with us. And thank you so, so much for joining GeoHug. I'm so grateful that you're here today. If you want to, yeah, fire up the presentation and we'll get stuck in.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks for the intro. Today I'm going to talk about our adventures in core scanning over at Freeport. tell you guys a little bit about what we've learned putting XRF and hyperspectral core scanners at our sites and at our core logging facilities. So I will just jump right in. We've done a little bit of the about me, but I've been with Freeport since 2017, with exploration based in Tucson. I currently run the mineralogy lab. This has consumed a huge amount of my time over the past few years, taking us from 1 XRD up to 4 XRDs, 2 wavelength dispersive XRFs, and 4 Terra specs. I got my bachelor's in New York, my master's in Indiana University, and my PhD at the University of Wyoming. Before Freeport, I've mostly worked on PGE deposits, nickel copper PGE deposits, igneous petrology, isotope geochemistry, that kind of thing. And you might be asking, with all of this sort of igneous petrology and geochemistry, how did I end up in charge of a mineralogy lab? Well, when we first got the XRD, I think somebody at Freeport went, well, Matt went to school for a long time. Let's have him run the machines. But it's been a lot of fun getting it all up and running and seeing what all we can get out of it. And then, before Freeport, I spent some time doing nickel exploration and gold exploration. All right, so let's get into it. So just a couple of disclaimers off the bat. First off, I'm not endorsing any particular core scanning company. Of course, I can only talk about the ones that we've worked with. And then this presentation then is based on only our experiences with 3 different companies. And I'll name the companies for sure. And our experience, though, they reflect each company's capabilities at the time of implementation. So all these companies that we worked with, they're always working to improve and update their equipment, their software, everything. So necessarily, whatever I have to tell you is a little outdated. Whatever they've got now is probably at least a little bit better. I won't make any specific comments about pricing. If you're curious about how much this sort of thing costs, I'd reach out to a core scanning company that seems interesting to you. And of course, any of my opinions here are my own and don't represent those of Freeport. All right, so let's get into some background. Start off, we drill a lot of core at Freeport. I will joke sometimes that our drilling strategy is if you drill enough, you don't actually have to mine it. It's all in core boxes. And that's sort of what we shoot for. This is some swag we got from a couple of years ago where we drilled 126 miles of core or 203 kilometers of core over 4 years on just one of our mines in Arizona. And in recent years, we drill about 1 million feet a year, 305,000 meters per year. And that's just exploration. That's not blast holes or anything. And this is mostly mine site exploration, I should say. So we drill a ton of core. So what other data can we get from all of this drill core we're spending a ton of money getting out of the ground? And of these other types of data, what can we model? What would be useful to model? And then from that stuff, some things are invisible to logging. And what can we learn from those things that our core loggers can't actually see? So that includes chemistry, that's mineral composition, that kind of thing that you can't see with your hand lens. We initially started with one XRD. This is my first XRD in its little XRD closet or old office. A couple PXRFs and a Terra spec sphere NIR spectrometer. And then around the pandemic, we didn't have a lot of work to do in the short term. So we started thinking like, hey, there's a lot of new technologies out there. What can we get into? What's out there that we haven't tried? Let's just make a plan to start trying it all. So that's what we did. So what can we get out of core scanning? So a little bit of background about the FMI process, because in some ways it's different because being such a huge drill operation. So for background, we have about 7 operating sites in Arizona and New Mexico, and another 2 in Colorado. And we do drill programs at those sites and other like small project sites. But we have a central logging facility located in Tucson, and that facility will mostly receive core from 4 of those sites. So, Morenci, our Safford projects, New Mexico, Baghdad, and we'll get core from others from time to time. So the core will go from the drill rig. Then it is quick logged by the geo on site. So there's me at a project from 2021. I think actually our first scanner is behind me. And then that core is shipped to Tucson, to our centralized core logging facility. And in Tucson, it gets detail logging. The core is split. And nowadays, this is still pretty new. It goes to the mineralogy lab, but that's after assay, after split and assay. So with that picture in mind, there's keep in mind our on-site location and our Tucson location. So what's core scanning good for? If you haven't heard too much about it yet, it's really good for ore body knowledge, right? This is a term you've probably heard a lot of in recent years, just more information about our ore bodies. and it can give more information to our core loggers in particular as well. So you can get some really granular detail from core scanning. For example, you can get chemistry on the centimeter to multiple centimeter scale. Mineralogy can show up on the millimeter pixel scale, and then identify those features that geologists can't see. And then it'll give us some mineralogy IDs and numbers that are not based on logging estimates. I mean, you get some experienced geologists in a room to look at a piece of core and tell you how much sericite you think there is, and they're going to give you two different numbers. You get some newer geos who are often the logging staff, and you're going to get way more different numbers, right? So this will kind of standardize that and give just more accurate and consistent information. And then faster data, from the mineralogy and chemistry side of things, right now, our process, we don't get that until after the assay is complete, right? This can get you that information prior to assay and mineralogy lab results. So one example I've got is, it's really easy to tell that there's copper in this rock, right? That is not subtle or obvious. But it's really hard to tell that there's actually 2% copper in this rock. That's pretty high grade material, and I can't see any of it. There's maybe some black oxide up here, but that 2% comes from right here, from the XRF and confirmed by assay later. So what kind of goals did we have? So we wanted to start with the two kind of main core scanning styles you hear about, the hyperspectral scanner and the XRF scanner. So the hyperspectral scanner, the idea with that one is we wanted to give our logging geologists more information about alteration and mineralogy to work with. So that can help them identify alteration. It'll help newer geologists kind of get their eyes on different types of alteration. It'll help the loggers in skarn intervals, because skarn is very difficult to log sometimes. And then pick out changes in alteration lithology really quickly. And of course, with all of this, XRF and hyperspectral, we're curious if any AI tools out there can help us and what core scanning companies might have which. On the XRF side of things, we're interested, of course, in multi-element geochemistry. At the time when we started doing these trials, Freeport had very little multi-element chemistry from all of that drilling we did. We pretty much had copper, moly, sometimes gold, sometimes calcium, and that was really it. So this was a good way for us to get more multi-element chemistry. And then we wanted to let our project geologists make more informed decisions about whether to end a hole or keep drilling, right? If I looked at that barren looking core I showed you the last page and someone said like, hey, we're at TD, do you want us to keep going? I'd say, nah, kill it, right? But it's 2% copper, killing it's the wrong choice. So this will help us, the idea is to help us identify that. But overall, the overall goal is we want to give our geologists more data while making them faster and more accurate, and decrease the time they spend on observation while increasing the time they spend on interpretation. So we decided, before I move on, these are two separate scanners. There are some scanners out there that do have both XRF and hyperspectral. We opted to do them separately. XRF is usually the rate limiting step. It's usually much slower than hyperspectral, so we just wanted to just completely decouple those things and see what we could do from them in isolation. All right, so our plan was there are two possible places that made sense for Freeport to put our core scanners. One of them is at the core shed on the drill project, and one is at the Tucson logging facility. So for the drill core, the project site, the pro is the core there gets scanned pretty early, and that should allow geologists to call holes based on XRF results. The con is it's a less controlled environment. If exploration shows up to the mine site and says we want a place to log core, they're going to find the most decrepit building with half a roof that they can on the site, and they're like, that's your core shed. So we have less availability to control the environment there. It's also harder to get equipment and core scanning supplier staff to some of our more remote locations quickly, right? If we need someone to fly out to fix a scanner, it's much easier for them to get a direct flight to Tucson and then drive to our office 10 minutes down the road than it is to fly to Phoenix and drive however far to Morenci or Safford or wherever. And then this would limit scanning to one project at the core shed site. But that might be a good location for XRF, because that's the only way our geos are going to be able to use that XRF result to make kind of more real-time decisions. At the Tucson logging facility, it's definitely a more controlled environment. We can scan core from all the projects on one scanner. It's easy to get equipment and staff there, but core gets scanned later in the process. You can't make drilling decisions based on that. At this point, the core has been drilled, it's been palletized, put on a truck and sent to Tucson. But that might be a good location for hyperspectral, because there's where we wanted to give our logging geologists more info. So very first scanner we tried in 2021 was TrueScan, an XRF scanner. This is a picture from their website. I realized while I was putting this presentation together that after putting scanners at, I don't know, 5, 6 different locations over how many years, I have taken a total of 1 photograph and 1 video of a scanner at our facility. So I ripped a lot of photos off of their websites. So TrueScan XRF, we deployed that on a small scale drill program at one of our inactive sites that we were just doing some delineation drilling to update our model on it. There were 4 core rigs and 1 RC rig, and a historic core relog and reassay that we did prior to the drill program revealed invisible copper was pretty common at this site. All that kind of stuff you just can't see, you can't plate it on a nail, nothing like that. So we deployed it in a core shed on site. TrueScan did offer to set it up behind the rig because it's pretty mobile, but it was more convenient to locate it in a trailer in the core shed. That way we didn't have to keep moving it each time we moved drill sites, and all the core would come to the same location. It was also run by TrueScan technicians on single 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week. They offered 2 shifts for 24/7 coverage, but it being a closed site, there's very few employees there overnight, so there were potential safety issues there, leaving someone alone. And then there were some cost savings from not having a second shift. And then we added RC chip scanning to the very end of the trial. So I will note, this first trial was rocky, but I don't want to blame TrueScan for that. We were one of their earlier clients, and these experiences don't reflect ongoing developments that they've made. And this was also our very first scanner trial, and we had no idea what we were doing. So all of that together made the first one a little rocky. Not bad, but there was a rocky start. So to implement it, calibration is necessary for XRF. So TrueScan requested about 500 multi-element analyses on pulps. And then we were to ship those pulps to them for analysis on the scanner. And this calibration set should, as closely as possible, match the type of material you will be scanning on the project. We knew this beforehand. They gave us a heads up, but at the time, assays were coming in so slowly that we didn't have time to get results prior to the scanner showing up on site. So our initial calibration was only for copper. Luckily, all the data can be reprocessed however many times you want. So it got reprocessed later to reflect the multi-element. For light element analysis, XRF scanners usually require helium. This one we found out a little bit too late. We needed to get some site permissions and new material request forms and find a helium supplier. And Freeport being a very big company, all of those things happened super slowly. So we got it together just in time, but it was a close call. It's also good to have internet connectivity. It's required for the data upload, and it's most efficient if there's an internet connection available to the scanner itself, which we got going after the first week or so. One unexpected thing is TrueScan was expecting much straighter core boxes. We've got these nice, flexible, ductile deformation style cardboard boxes that are so common in the United States. And that just increased the core staging times. The TrueScan technicians had to kind of straighten everything out a little bit. And then we had to talk to the drill crews about loading the core boxes more carefully, because those guys will jam 3 feet of core in a 2-foot slot if they can. So we just had to get that all settled. All right, so implementation and challenges. First off, there were some occasional heat issues that we had. The site, we had a week where it was 116 degrees or 47 C for those of you in Celsius, which I'm sure our friends in Australia are familiar with. But this cropped up even in the core shed. I think one of the issues was the screen was overheating and kept going out. So it's unlikely that deploying behind a rig would have worked. So good thing we found out that it was in the core shed. We also learned that in broken rubbly core, you don't get a continuous scan. So for a core box that looked like this, you'd get a continuous scan for this piece and then some spot tests. So this broken material wouldn't really get analyzed. Our core was pretty broken, and I think none of us, we were expecting it, but I don't think TrueScan was. So it was just a good thing to learn. And then this one scanner with one shift could keep up with about 2 of our 4 drill rigs. It did about 80 meters or 260 feet per shift. So basically it would fall behind early in the drill hole and then catch up late in the drill hole when the holes were deeper. That's a little faster now because I believe they now have a dual phase analyzer head. This old one required 2 scans, 1 pass for the light and 1 pass for the heavy elements, but I think now they can do it all in one, which is pretty sweet. And in the end, at this point, the turnaround time ended up being a little bit too slow to use the data for drilling decisions. but it was actually really good, and it turned out, to have the TrueScan staff running the scanner instead of FMI staff. Initially I kind of wanted more hands-on, like I'd like our people to do it, but they only want their people to do it. But in the end, it was actually great because we didn't have to schedule anyone to do anything, and they were much better at troubleshooting than we would be. I remember at the end of the trial, we added RC chips, and scanning RC chips is much faster than core. So I believe one core tray like this one takes about 20 minutes, or at least it did when we were running it. But and that'll get you 10 feet or 3 meters. For RC chips, our 10-foot intervals, you could load about 20 of them onto that tray. So you could do, a huge amount of, way, way, way faster running RC chips. It did require a separate calibration on coarse rejects, and we did have to make sure the chips were dried before running them, which when it's 116 out is not that hard, but it's something to consider. All right, so for TrueScan, the data got uploaded to an Amazon Web Services bucket, and you can access it directly from an S3 browser or through TrueScan's online web tool, which is mostly what we did. And that includes a logging tool, a structural tool, graphing tools, some other good stuff. One of their features was the auto logger, so we could get in there and manually log a few drill holes, and then tell the auto logger hey, this is what these rock types look like. Go identify the rest of it, and then it would make predictions based on the chemistry, which is really cool. However, our success was a little bit mixed, sometimes good, sometimes bad. But we also had a lot of bretches, which are tough. So I'm not going to hold that against TrueScan's auto predict tool, because bretches are just rough. And then they had their True Structure tool, and that automatically logs veins and fractures. You need to train it a little bit to be effective, but once you have it trained up, it'll automatically identify all those features, which I thought was really neat. Here's the orientation lines, so it'll give you angles. There's some fractures. At the time, it required a user to upload a survey file to generate RQD. So because of an issue we had with one of our survey files, I wasn't able to get RQD out of it. But if we had the survey file, it seems like it goes really fast. So as far as the data itself, when we added that full calibration with extra elements, it actually improved our copper data, probably because of some matrix effects that could be accounted for once we actually had the full suite. It was actually pretty good at the oxide ore. It matched assay reasonably well, but it kind of fell short on the sulfide ore. So the sulfide ore values were consistently low. You can see this trend here. It's a very distinct trend below that 1-to-1 line. So this is the 1-to-1 line. This is all oxide samples, and then the sulfide samples all fell below that line. The good thing there is this is nice and linear, and it's a really tight cluster. There's not a lot of scatter around that line, so that should be easily correctable with a recalibration. But we didn't quite get there with our trial. Overall, though, the multi-element chemistry was good. We saw clear trends and breaks in the data, good for identifying changes in rock type, good for auto-identifying rock type once we got that trained up, though we didn't go back and verify with multi-element assays. So just a couple quick pictures. Here's just some drill holes. This is all TrueScan data. It identified the high copper zones, and it even picked out, our chalcocite veins, even the sulfide, this type of sulfide, it actually did okay on. It didn't have that issue that we had with the chalcopyrite and bornite material. So all of this worked really well. This was once we got into sulfide ore. So this was a 1 meter interval that TrueScan logged as 0.5% copper, but this is basically solid chalcopyrite. So clearly there was something wrong with that. And I'm confident on a longer trial we would have got there. We just didn't quite get there on this first one. Overall, though, I think for a very first trial, it went pretty well. So the second scanner we tried is we moved into the hyperspectral world, and we went with Terra for this one. We wanted a scanner that had long wavelength infrared, as well as the visible to near infrared and short wave infrared, so VNIR and SWIR, along with the high resolution RGB camera. We wanted that long wave camera because that will capture things that we see in skarns. So that'll do a good job with things like olivine, do a good job with things like pyroxene, and it will even get things like quartz and feldspar in our normal porphyry rocks. For hyperspectral, we didn't require a calibration set, so we could just kind of hit the ground running there. With this kind of scanner, it did require an internet connection to have for a mobile processing unit, because this produces an enormous amount of data, right? So it gets pre-processed a little bit first on some mobile processing unit, and then that pre-processed data gets sent to Terra for processing in the end, and that's what they eventually give us. So that unit needs an internet connection. TerraCore probably had the most versatile of the companies we looked at, the most versatile model for how we could potentially run it. Anything from sending core to them giving us a scanner and having their staff run it, to all run by us. In our initial trial, we opted to have TerraCore personnel assisted by FMI staff run the scanner at one of our sites. And then we later used TerraCore for a year-long implementation. And for that, it was all FMI staff. So we needed to consider FMI staff scheduling. And then for the long wave scanner, that required core to reach thermal equilibrium prior to scanning because it was a thermal-based camera, right? Which can sometimes be tough in Arizona in the summertime if we're keeping our core out in the yard, right? So we'd have to bring it in to reach equilibrium. A little more on that later. And then here's just like a quick, big, ugly chart, but it's a cheat sheet for what the different types of spectral analyses are good for. So veneer and SWIR, especially SWIR, is really good for your phyllosilicates, amphiboles, alunite, that kind of thing. Long wavelength, that's good for things like, your feldspars and quartz, diopside, olivine, garnet, stuff you might see in skarns. All right, so for implementation of the TerraCore, TerraCore can be set up in a shipping container, which is good because an air-conditioned shipping container was the only option we had at our smaller core facility when we first brought TerraCore online before we moved to our current larger facility. Unfortunately, again, Tucson is hot in the summer and the air conditioner could not keep up. So we had to shift all of the technicians, TerraCore and FMI technicians, to start their shifts well before sunrise and call it quits at like 10 in the morning. And then it was kind of tough to equilibrate the core at appropriate temperature for the long wavelength scanner, and they could start to see the effects of that on the results by the end of the shift. That said, even with those challenges, the scanning on a hyperspectral machine is very fast. So we scanned about 17,000 feet or 5,200 meters in about a month, despite those difficult conditions. And then we later implemented it for a year at our larger indoor logging facility in Tucson, which did not have the heat problems. TerraCore's app is IntelliCore. It's very user friendly, but it does require training, which is provided by TerraCore. It's just something to be aware of. If you were to use a program like this and you're rotating staff that might use this system, your first set of staff, they might get the training, and your second set of staff will need to be trained again to use the software. It is user friendly. It's just there's a lot of data. There's customizable workspaces though that they can set up for you, which basically shows you the data you want to see right from go, which is really handy. And the data is very detailed. So about 1 millimeter square pixels, a little bit coarser for the long wavelength, but I think they have a new camera that is about the same resolution as the veneer SWIR camera. It's image based, like you see here. You get these nice mineral maps that everyone likes to see. But it also is depth based, so it'll give you downhole maps of your drill hole, and that's exportable as CSV, and you can bring that into a model. We usually saw about a 2-week processing time, so that usually gave us enough time to get it scanned in advance of logging, but we needed careful coordination. There were some times that someone would scan it on the TerraCore and then give it immediately to the logger, and they're like, well, we didn't have time to evaluate the data, so now they're kind of going in without it, but it's just all communication. So one thing I'll point out with the hyperspectral data that a lot of people miss is it's not just mineral maps. There's also interesting features you can pull out of it from other spectral features. So in this example here, I've got some drill core, a lot of really similar looking veins. These look like veins with quartz sericite selvages. There's some QS alteration throughout the rock as well. So we can actually use one index that will show us the phyllosilicate abundance mapped on the core. This isn't a specific mineral, this is just phyllosilicates. That gives us an idea of how intense the alteration is in different places on the core. We can also, though, view the H2O content of those phyllosilicates to give us a proxy for temperature. So we can see that some of our phyllosilicate veins, the ones that are cool color, so low water, those are more high temperature, whereas the ones that are warm color, so higher water, are lower temperature. So we can see kind of multiple generations, like veins that look the same, but were different temperature regimes. And then you can also get mineral chemistry differences between the different micas. So this will show you phengitic versus more muscovitic micas, and you can see there's a range of compositions in this drill core as well. And this sort of information is really useful for vein paragenesis information and vectoring if you're looking to do vectoring based on temperature and mineral chemistry. So it's not just mineral maps, there's a whole lot more to it, and this is just one example. All right, this is one I took a picture of. Our third scanner was Minized. We did used these guys for a short trial at one central core logging facility for I think 3 months, and then a longer year-long implementation at our central logging facility in Tucson. One of the reasons we went with them for the year-long implementation instead of TrueScan was because for Minized, we used FMI staff to run it, so we didn't have to pay for, TrueScan for a year. We would have had to pay for TrueScan technicians for a full year. So for Minized, for a full year, we used our own technicians. We decided we wanted to locate it. You know what I'll do? I'll play this video so you can get hypnotized by Minized doing its thing while I talk. We decided to locate the core scanner at a central logging facility in this case. And when we tried TrueScan out at site, we didn't quite get the data fast enough to make drilling decisions. So we figured, well, let's go ahead and place it in a central location. It's better conditions in our core logging facility, and we can scan pretty much whatever we want on it, right? We were ready for the calibration this time. We knew it was coming well beforehand, so we had a leg up on the second trial. Minized wanted about 30 calibration samples, and they did it based off of actually the drill core. So we would give them the results from our geochemical assays, and then they would scan the unassayed half of the drill core as the calibration set. Overall, it was an easier calibration process compared to TrueScan, I thought, just because fewer samples, it's much less expensive. That said, I know TrueScan has rolled out what they call their global calibration recently, and I haven't had much experience with it, but they could probably tell you more about it if you're interested in that sort of thing. In this time around, we were ready for the helium, and this time we had to consider scheduling FMI staff to run it instead of just letting the scanner staff run it. All right, so the daily scanning rate for Minized was approximately the same as TrueScan. So we got about 300 feet, 90 meters per day on average. The prep was less prep was required and it was faster, but since we were using FMI technicians, we were working 10-hour shifts instead of 12. So we gained some speed on the scanner and prep, but we lost some time per day that we ran because we were using our technicians. The turnaround time was, again, honestly, the turnaround time was about the same as TrueScan. At that time, we had a very aggressive logging schedule. So sometimes the core had to be logged like right after it was scanned, or even sometimes before it was scanned. So our loggers didn't get to use the data. That's just sometimes the reality of our Freeport logging schedule, just because we drill so much core and we've just got to get it through. If we could have waited on it, it wasn't a hugely long wait time. It was just too long for us at the moment. Whenever the instrument malfunctioned, the FMI staff were actually much less able to troubleshoot it than the supplier staff was with TrueScan, which is what we expected. But that was especially apparent over our year-long contract, right? So there's pluses and minuses to using the scanner staff, the staff of the scanning supplier versus your own staff, and that's one of them. All right, so this is the Minilogger web app. So this is what Minized's interface looks like. This one is extremely user-friendly. So if you needed to shift staff through your program, it's really easy to get someone new up to speed on this one. It's really intuitive, and there's not, geochemistry, in some ways, geochemistry is geochemistry. There's not a bunch of mysterious, arcane spectral indices that a lot of people don't know about, right? So that makes it a little bit easier too, just by the nature of the type of data. Minized also includes a LiDAR scan. So the main screen shows your LiDAR scan in 3D, so you can rotate this around. You can pull up your high-res imagery. You can plot the chemistry right on the drill core. So if you're logging, you can see where copper jumps or zirconium jumps or something like that. At the time we did it, we couldn't export the photos directly from Minilogger. So that was a little bit annoying, but Minized was actually really good about sending us our photos when we wanted them. I should also note here, I didn't mention it before, since we did this, Bort Longyear spun off TrueScan as Veracio, and then Veracio acquired Minized, so they're all kind of the same company now. Not Terra though. All right, so the data resolution that you get in Minized is an interval that you agree on with the company. So we said, hey, let's do about a foot and composite on 10 feet. Some people will, I think in oil and gas might ask for stuff down to like the millimeters or centimeter scale, but that's a longer scan time. So this about a foot gave us good resolution on the core box scale without slowing down things too much. And it was also really quick and easy in Minilogger to get RQD from the LiDAR imagery. You pretty much load your run box and you click a button, and then you have your RQD data right down there. Super easy. And then right at the end, it also does specific gravity measurements, and it needs calibration, but it does that as well. The tool will identify the scan path for you right on the course. It'll show you where the scans actually happened. It'll show you any broken or rubble zones that weren't scanned. Um, it'll label blocks. It'll label missing core if there's core loss. The data quality also is good quality and consistent. Like TrueScan, it showed expected breaks and trends on lithology. The calibration though still was problematic a little bit for sulfide. Again, this is a nice linear trend, easily correctable. I actually need to send this to Minized still. I didn't have access to some of these assays until very, very recently, so I can send them to this, and they've always been really good about, oh yeah, we'll tweak that and get it all fixed up. They're all very responsive. All right, so the calibration. Our calibration this time, the results were likely improved by the fact that we included whole rock results for our calibration. We didn't do that with TrueScan because they wanted 500 samples, and whole rock assays are expensive. But you should know that a 4-acid digest, which is the most common multi-element assay that people will get, often underreports geochemically important elements. So things like zirconium, titanium, and vanadium. And zirconium in particular, I've found when I get both assays is often an order of magnitude underreported in 4-acid versus a whole rock method like a lithium metaborate fusion. So that's a really important geochemical tracer. So give the system good data to calibrate on, and you'll get good results. And again, any scan can always be reprocessed when you recalibrate. So there's no such thing as you got bad results and they're bad forever, right? It can always be fixed. Oh yeah, there's a trend. Okay, so in the meantime, this was over a course of a couple of years, these trials and all these things we were doing. So we tried some other things. I mostly focused on core scanning for this, but we definitely tried some other technologies that I think are worth mentioning. And we also changed some things at Freeport that impacted the way we looked at our core scanner results and how we used our core scanner results. So one thing we started doing was started trialing was doing photo analysis services. So the one we mostly went with was DataRock. We worked with DataRock on image analysis to get geotechnical and RQD logging. And the result was it was much faster and much more accurate than doing it manually. I mean, whenever there was a mismatch between the manual versus the manual ground truth and the DataRock RQD, it was nearly always the manual logging that was wrong, except for some edge cases like dark veins in white core that looked like fractures. We also started using a cloud-based photo storage. We went with Imago. I think a lot of people go with Imago. It made it easy and fast for us to access our photos, and was actually easier than accessing our photos on our old server storage method. And it had APIs that lets us directly share photos with certain vendors like DataRock. So that was a good match there. Practice-wise, we actually expanded what we send for assay. So we now get 4-acid digest multi-element analyses for all of our assay intervals, which is it's pricey, but it gets us a lot of data. So kind of partway through getting all this great XRF scanner data, it mostly replaced the need for our XRF scanner because now we were getting multi-element on everything. And it's, getting 4-acid on everything, while it's pricey, is more scalable to our volume of drill core, just because we don't have to put one more scanner for every X number of feet we want to scan each day. So that's not to say that it's still not, that it wouldn't be useful on smaller projects or different targeted projects, but in the large scheme of our program, the 4-acid digest kind of replaced it. Again, not a choice for everyone to make because the assays are expensive, but that's what we did. And then we also expanded our mineralogy lab. So our internal exploration mineralogy lab has expanded to 4 XRDs, 4 SWIR spectrometers, and those spectrometers we get quantitative predictions from because we use a chemometric model built off of XRD and CEC data for clays. So that gives us quantitative mineralogy results. And then we're currently implementing or bringing on 2 wavelength dispersive XRFs for specific targeted elements on these assay pulp intervals. So this lab works on assay pulp, so this is definitely later in the process than any core scanning. But we can process now about 6,000 plus samples per month, so that equates to 60,000 feet or 18,300 meters every month, and that's only increasing as we increase our automation in the lab. And this data is really good for block models because it's quantitative. So that's another thing that changed while we were doing these trials. So just to review, let's just hit some takeaways before I wrap it up. We put XRF at site, we put an XRF at our central logging facility, and we put our hyperspectral scanner at our central logging facilities. So for XRF, it ended up, the turnaround time wasn't fast enough for us to make drilling decisions. Moving it to the central facility might have actually been the wrong call for us, even though it made sense at the time. The fact that it had a relatively low volume and required calibration meant that it was probably best to leave the XRF at a single project, right? So if we were going to do a single project, well, we might as well leave it at the site and scan the material as soon as possible after it's drilled, right? And then our loggers have access to that high resolution geochemistry data before they get to it. So that's probably what we should have done in the end. And then also unsplit core gives the best data and has the least prep time, so easier to do that at site. The fact that we got multi-element assays on all of our exploration samples partway through using it kind of made the XRF data a bit redundant, but that doesn't mean it's bad. That means that it was just redundant for us. If you don't get multi-element geochemistry on every assay interval, then XRF might be what you're looking for. We did some follow-up trials with TrueScan that I'm not going to comment too much on because I wasn't very involved with them. And they're working on blast holes, and I think they did another project with some RC chips. But the blast hole project, they actually were usually able to correctly route certain material to ore waste or ROM. The copper precision could have been better. That might have been a result of the coarseness of the blast hole material. So that trial has ended. I think they're still doing some evaluation on it. Again, I wasn't too involved in it, but there's more potential for that kind of work because it did usually route the material to the correct place. For hyperspectral, I think the hyperspectral scanner could work at a site or at a central facility. Either way, there's advantages to each. We prefer the central facility because you get your best imagery on saw split core, that nice, smooth, flat surface. On actually unsplit core, you get edge effects at the curved edges of the core, which can kind of complicate your data processing. And it's just nicer to have that nice flat surface. You do need to scan as soon as possible to allow for that processing time prior to logging. And then, of course, coordinate carefully to make sure that any core that you scan is not logged before you get the results back for it. It's less useful to block model compared to the quantitative data that we produce in our lab. But that said, if you don't have a high volume XRD lab with internal experts, it's fine for block modeling. It does a good job at it. Like the only thing you need to keep in mind is that the different cameras only see what they're designed to see, right? So the SWIR camera will only see minerals that are responsive to SWIR. So we had some, magnetite skarns, right? Magnetite skarns will often have a lot of magnetite, a little olivine, a little serpentine. And in the SWIR camera, it would look like it was all serpentine. So it would plot as all serpentine downhole. Since it's not quantitative, it doesn't necessarily tell you that there's only a little bit of serpentine. It says everything the SWIR scanner sees is serpentine. And that's not a bad thing. That's just something to keep in mind when you're using this certain type of data for modeling, because it is useful for modeling to know where your mineralogy changes and even where your mineral composition changes, because it can tell you all that information. It did improve the speed and accuracy of our loggers who were logging skarn core, because the skarn is just rough. It is just hard to log. We didn't see much of a speed increase from non-skarn material, but there was still more potential for tweaking the workspaces we had and tweaking our process. And that's definitely something possible to do down the line. And then, of course, there's a high potential for mineralogy and mineral composition vectoring. And that's partly why you might want to model this data in your leapfrog models. Volume for this was a lot higher than XRF, but it was still insufficient for our drill the entire world out strategy. So during the trial. So it would have done probably well on a single project, I think. In the end, though, what we aim to do and what I recommend you guys do if you try out any core scanning companies is maintain relationships with those companies, because this technology is always changing. I keep in pretty good contact with the folks from all of these places, and they're always like, hey, we've got something new and we'd love for you to try it. This other new thing came out. So it's just keep those relationships going. Everyone we worked with was really easy to work with and really open to feedback. They want to provide a product that you want to use. Because when the customer, that's me, when the customer succeeds, the core scanning provider succeeds, and we all have a better time of it. So just maintain those relationships, whether or not you maintain the scanning in the present time. So if you're planning a program, some advice I have to keep in mind is have a specific project or goal in mind for your scanning program. Um, if you go with like a let's see how it goes sort of approach, you might waste some money and have a bunch of unused data, right? And we fell victim to that a little bit from the get-go. Like we had somewhat defined data, but we also didn't really know what to expect from core scanning in general just because we had never done it before, right? So have a really, really well-defined narrow scope project in mind when you bring one of these projects on, want to bring a scanner on. Also have a clear understanding of your daily scanning volume that you need. Make sure you're scanning in the right place at the right time and prioritizing unsplit core or saw split core as the case may be. And then of course, have all your calibrations, connections, power supply, approvals, yada, yada, yada. Have that all set before your scanner arrives and make sure you have a very, with your provider, make sure you have a very clear understanding of what those are. And then, of course, like review any available scanning contract models with your provider, right? There's all kinds of different models. You know, like I said, TerraCore had a whole bunch of different ways that we could potentially run a project. You know, it might not work for you, depending on the size of your project, to bring a scanner onto your site and install it onto your site. It might make better sense to ship your core to the company's office and have them scan it for you all in one go and send you a batch of data, and there you have it, right? There's all kinds of options available. So talk to your provider about what might work for you. And the last thing is to choose the right tool for the job. And that would not be complete without me telling you what I think the right tool for the job is. So I will. So I kind of broke our volume, the potential volumes here into low, medium, and high. I put some vague numbers on that, but I mostly defined these volumes based on low volume is something that the XRF scanner can handle. Medium volume is something that the XRF scanner might struggle to keep up on, but a hyperspectral scanner can handle. And a high volume of core is just any amount that can outstrip both of them. I think still in the end, if you need to make quick drilling decisions with your geos at the rig, and you need that data right away, PXRF is the way to go, right? Those little handheld XRFs. If you can't see the mineralization, just give it a couple zaps with the XRF and see what pops up. If you want multi-element geochemistry, or alternatively, if you want to target assay intervals, XRF scanner is great for that at low volumes. Absolutely great for that. I say target assay intervals because you can use the XRF scanner to say, pick out the unmineralized zones from the mineralized zones. I would still have your assays done by a lab because it's not so reliant on that calibration. And then of course, it's great for multi-element. For a medium volume, you might need multiple XRF scanners or do it on RC chips. It can keep up with RC chips just fine in that kind of medium volume zone, or just assay everything. Once you hit high volume, though, you're probably into the assay everything realm. Or you might still be in the XRF on chips, maybe multiple scanners on chips, depending on volume. For any kind of alteration, mineral composition or vectoring, hyperspectral scanners are great at low and medium volumes, absolutely great. At high volume, you might need multiples. You could potentially get a SWIR spectrometer on assay pulps. Those Terra specs with a quick analysis probe, they can work really fast, and then you can send that data to a company like AI Cirrus if you don't have something local to you, and they can process it for you relatively cheaply. We also did a short trial with them I didn't mention. For geotech logging, overall, I think the photo analysis services are kind of the best for that, right? The XRF, if you're at a low volume and you're getting an XRF scanner anyway, then might as well get that from your XRF scanner rather than also paying for the photo services. But those photo services are really good. I think there's probably some hyperspectral scanners out there that do that as well. And then anything you want to put in your model, any mineralogy you want to put in your model, really the best quality data you can get is XRD coupled with a SWIR spectrometer and a chemometric model, right? It's going to give you quantitative data on exactly your assay interval. That said, it requires a huge setup time. It requires internal expertise, and doing it externally is really expensive. So for most users, you're going to want to go with a hyperspectral scanner or that AI-driven SWIR data processing, kind of like AI Cirrus. And like I said, just because it's not necessarily straight quantitative doesn't mean it's not useful. It's still really useful, especially if you're vectoring or especially if you're dealing with tricky issues like talc is causing problems at the mill or something like that. It's great for that. Once you hit the high volumes, though, you'll either need multiple scanners or you're just going to have to go straight to that AI-driven data processing. But yeah, that's what I got. I thought this would be a good talk because there's a lot of talks out there and a lot of information out there from core scanning providers or people who are proponents of core scanning, and there wasn't really a lot out there from like just your average Joe like me who doesn't know anything about core scanning, giving a whole bunch of it a try. So this was just like what it looked like from our point of view, things that were good, things we struggled with, um, how we thought each tool was useful, and you know how you might be able to bring a core scanner onto your site and have a successful project. So, thanks.